Hello everybody, welcome to episode 10 of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. You know what? I can't believe we're at episode 10 already. It's gone really fast, and in essence we've had 3 lots of episodes from 3 fantastic guests. Now, because we're in the first 10 episodes, I have to include myself in those 3 fantastic guests, because episodes 1 to 3 were me telling you all about my leadership story, my take on game and leadership, and those pivotal moments that make me the leader I am today. Then, of course, we had the fantastic Darren Sweet, creative digital leadership and development extraordinaire that he is, in episodes 4, 5 and 6. And then the most recent guest, the fantastic Jodie Salt, #1 best-selling author of Woman Up and Women's Assertiveness Coach, in episodes 7, 8 and 9. So it's been amazing. We've got here so quickly. So what am I doing here, all on my lonesome, talking to you? Well, what I thought would be helpful, given that life is super busy, would be to do a little bit of a synopsis of the key things that were takeaways from me from each of the episodes. And because I'm kind of a curious coach by nature, I guess is the best way to say it, I like to ask lots of questions, and you'll probably have noted by now that the way I write the show notes for each episode, in other words, the little bullet points that give you the episode at a glance, if you like, they kind of are questions to you to get you thinking. And you know what? I've really enjoyed doing that from each episode. So bringing that together now as some of my kind of key takeaways, I thought might be really helpful. So let's go back to my episodes 1 to 3, and let me give you a few reflections on that. Now, of course, episode 1, I was super excited in sharing Game of Leadership with you all for the first time, and couldn't help myself, of course, and I am still so thrilled to be here at episode 10 with you all. But I was able to share my leadership story, if you like, and why I'm where I am today, doing what I'm doing, and sitting here chatting to all of you, which is an absolute honour and a privilege. We learned where I came from, and I guess one of my key takeaways from that episode was that it's okay to be a bit vulnerable. And actually, it's really helpful to show that I'm human, and, I'm just as messy as the next leader in terms of my human complexities that I bring to the world and how I choose to show up. Because it did take a bit of courage, I think, to think about putting myself out there and doing this podcast. So for me, I've really enjoyed being able to share my story and thinking that people might be interested in what I have to say, and being able to share that for you. So that's been a real sort of reflection and takeaway, that it's okay to be vulnerable and show your true self. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to air my dirty laundry in public, if you like, and that's a really old saying from our parents. That's really made me laugh, a blast from the past. One doesn't air one's dirty laundry in public. Making my parents sound really austere. They're certainly not. But, that's how it sort of popped up in my mind. But, stuff that's really inspired me. And then if I sort of think about spilling into episode 2, where I was talking about my take on game and leadership. I guess my main takeaway from there is that we do really all see things differently. And whilst I'm telling you my takeaways and giving you some ideas of things that might resonate for you, and asking you some questions here, if you go back and listen, you'll probably take away something very different than I would. We may be observing or listening to the same thing, but we'll both hear slightly or sometimes vastly different things. It's interesting how our minds work. It's absolutely fascinating to me. So, and I guess my favourite bit from that were the benefits of the humble check-in, as I called it. And, if you go back and listen to that episode, let me ask you now, have you been able to use that check-in with your team? I should ask, how have you been able to use that check-in with your team to find out how they're doing at the moment, what's going on for them? And it's not that, how are you doing? I'm fine, thanks, and moving on. It goes much deeper than that. And are you really listening to them? Have a think about that one. And then we came to episode 3, where I was talking about my pivotal moments that make me who I am today. And the funny thing about reflecting on those, because some of that was a bit difficult to share. I didn't share all the gory details, of course, but just enough to give you a flavour. I am and still remain a glass half full person. I really do try to see the positive outcomes of things, even though it may have been tough to go through whatever it might have been. So what are your defining moments that make you who you are today? And then the other thing that was, I remember now talking about it, was I talked about karma and how what goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. You can't continue to be unpleasant, difficult, whatever you want to call it, and not expect any consequences for your actions, I guess. So that really stuck with me from that episode. So maybe it's time to reflect on how you impact others when you show up as a leader. And then let's bounce into Darren Sweet's episodes. I mean, what a fantastic guy, so creative, super genius in digital learning and development. And how privileged were we to get a game created for us for Game of Leadership podcast, just for our listening pleasure, to get us talking all about leadership. Now, Darren, of course, shared his leadership story and his struggles and all of his messiness, if you like, as a human, and how he chooses to show up now as the leader that he is today, and how it took time to build his self-belief. So I ask you, how well do you believe in yourself as a leader now? How could you build on that self-belief? What do you need to do to help you to do that? So by the end of this episode, you're going to have so many questions that I've asked you, just because I'm curious to know the answers, and let me know if I can help with any of those in terms of helping you answer them. But, he talked about the agility required in our learning journey, and that really resonated with me. I'm in one of my past lives, I've been a project manager, so I've had to be able to flex and adapt so that I can make sure that the project comes in to time and budget, despite the challenges that come in left field along the way. So how are you bringing agility into your leadership it's fascinating, isn't it, how each one of us adapts and flexes differently. And it does make me think about that growth mindset that we touched on during that episode. So do go back and have a listen if you want to hear a little bit more about that. And then we talked about, in his third episode, episode 6, that internal change agent within each of us. How does that show up for you in your leadership? And then, when Darren was talking about his pivotal moments, he did talk about that moment that somebody believed in him and gave him a chance to move forwards. So let me ask you, when was the last time you gave somebody a chance to prove themselves, and show you what they're capable of? Because you'll always have people in your team. Everybody's different in the team, of course, but you will always have 1 or 2, 3 or 4, depends how big your team is, that are eager to show up and do more and try new things and help you progress, and do better as a team. So when was the last time you gave somebody a chance to do that? Being a promoter of their leadership development, as well as, of course, looking after your own. And yeah, intuition. We got into intuition as well. Goodness me. Trusting our gut. We all know when the hairs on the back of our neck go up and we know that something doesn't feel right. So how are you using that in the way that you lead day to day? That brings me then to the last 3 episodes, 7, 8 and 9, with the amazing Jodie Salt. Goodness me, we were all over the place in this episode, and I'd say all over the place, but brought in so much value. And I have to say, same goes with Darren's episodes as well. But right at the start, Jodie talked about flukes, her leadership journey being a series of flukes, which really made me smile because, and certainly resonated with me, because I, in my earlier career, for sure, definitely sort of stumbled across the next opportunity. However, I will say that, again, thinking about that and having reflected on it and taking time for all this information to sink in, there is something intentional there for me. If I hadn't had the desire to progress and the drive to achieve more, I probably wouldn't have seized those opportunities that presented themselves to me to be able to move to the next step. So I think there's something in there about your intuition telling you what to go for, even at those early stages of your career. And I've come across all sorts of different leaders over the years, some that are happy doing what they do and their main focus is more outside of work and leading their own life. And I know that I mentioned it takes real skill to lead your life with all the complexities that we have in our personal lives these days, managing all the relationships, managing the household, managing the wider family, whatever you've got going on for yourselves. And then if you've got a career on top of that as well, the two definitely do merge. And Jodes and I get onto that in her third episode, where we talk about that professional and that personal crossover and connection. Just before that, though, she did make me laugh in her second episode, episode 8, where we were talking about her take on game and leadership. And for her, it's about those behaviours in leadership. And she really made me laugh when she said nobody likes to be put in a box. And I think for many of us, that's really, really true. We don't like to be labelled with things. Sometimes labels are really unhelpful. because people will say, well, they probably can't do that because they're an X, or you probably shouldn't give that to them because they're a Y, whatever it might be. You get the idea. And also, labels in other senses. If I think about, I'm just reflecting on my own family. My daughter was recently diagnosed as dyslexic. That's a label. It's helpful because it means she'll get the right support and things in terms of the work environment that she'll be in when she's older, and now in the school environment. But at some stage, it could be an unhelpful label, as in she may find herself discriminated against because they don't want somebody with dyslexia in a certain job. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But it's something to watch out for, and think about how you're handling that whole diversity and inclusion piece. How are you being inclusive in your leadership? It's an interesting question, isn't it? So one for you to take away. Gosh, what else did we cover? So much. And I had so many takeaways from talking to Jodie. But she talked about feeling liberated in her leadership, and that really that really made me reflect on my own leadership journey, because since taking the decision to open my own business, I think liberated is a really great word as to how I felt in doing that. Liberated to, and I often use this term, be the master of my own destiny. And it always makes people laugh when I say that, but I genuinely mean it. Being the master of my own destiny, because I'm my own boss and I get to choose what I want to do and when and how. Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders, wouldn't be a thing if I was completely constrained in an employed role and unable to make my own choices. So, that sort of entrepreneurship has certain advantages in that sense. But yes, being liberated to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Now, of course, there is a certain amount of liberation when you're in employed roles as well. And certainly in your personal life, when you give yourself permission, and we can all choose to do that for ourselves, to go out and get the things that we really want. And one last reminder, Jode's talked about that Morabian wheel in communication and how it's, she didn't go into the percentages, but it always fascinates me. 7% of our communication is attributed to verbal, only 7%. And then it's 38% and 55% for non-verbal and kind of visual stuff going on. I forget what they exactly call it all, but look it up if you want to have a look in more detail. But it is fascinating that the words I'm using now, if you're listening to this audio podcast, you're only getting 7% of the communication. That's quite scary, isn't it, when you think about that? But I'm hoping that you've sat down with your notepad, written down some of the questions that I've asked you today. And I guess my last one will probably be, how can you feel liberated in your own leadership? That's one to take away and think about. So there's so much in what I've talked about today, so much in the first 9 episodes of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. And I really hope you've enjoyed listening to our guests and learning as much as I have. If nothing else, it's caused you to reflect on how you're showing up as a leader and think about what it is that you might want to change moving forwards. So sleep on it tonight. Have a think, let that fantastic brain of yours marinate on all those thoughts that are going around your head. And when you first wake up in the morning tomorrow, see what's popped up. Now, I talk about that when I do, as part of my accelerated purpose experience or connecting with your purpose for individuals, the accelerated purpose experience being for teams. We talk about that marination overnight, or that percolating. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you so much for listening today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've been Paula Eddy-Wilcox, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. Bye for now.